Stephen asked me to introduce myself initially. So I guess my connection with the overall theme, beauty at work, is, I hope, with an impact business that I founded 10 years ago in Bethlehem to create jobs and skills that would survive in peace or conflict, and to model integrity and gender equality and transcend the divide. It's a call centre, call transcend, with an invisible export. So it's fairly resilient. It is actually struggling at the moment. After 10 years, 150 staff, it's been good, but we are struggling to compete. So please pray for us. My other involvement at the moment is 10 Transformational Enterprise Network, which is a sort of successor to TBN. And it's really a bunch of Christian business people that want to use their skills to alleviate poverty. And I think if I can put one advert in, I'm especially excited by our business startup resources and a new Africa edition, which is available, like the other things, completely freely, copyright free for anyone to use, edit, whatever. So that's all at 10tencommunity.net. Do take a look at that. That's the advert out of the way. Ram, really good to be here. Real honour to interview you. And I'm kind of tempted to start with, no, where are you really from? Because you have such a great story in view of the controversy yesterday. But the title is Our Silk Road, and that maybe gets us into that. How does Bethlehem is on the Silk Road, but how do you connect with the Silk Road?
Sure. Well, it actually would refer to the question you would ask. And I love that question, by the way, where are you from? Because it always gives me an opportunity to build bridges, relationships, communication, understanding. I love it. And in a sense, I must confess, I was disappointed at the outcome and sad at what happened yesterday. But be that as it may, I've drafted a couple of sentences to send to some of the newspapers, and I hope they publish it, which is, I really feel that it's such a great question. You asked me where I'm from. It starts with what now is Pakistan, but what was British India. And just before partition, again, talk about beautiful business. My great-grandparents were funeral bearers. They sang at funerals. That was their caste and culture. Now, I look at that time, it must have been awful to be a funeral bearer because you were sort of untouchable. But I look back now and I see that music, and it's gone right through our family, through the generations. With today, my children just loving music, and I can see where that's come from. The beauty of that side of business. And then my grandparents saw the need at funerals for textiles, silk, cloth. And they realized that with the Indians who were being indentured to build railways in East and Central Africa, we could supply silk. Why doesn't one of the brother go to Japan? This is in the 1910s now. And the other brother go to East Africa, and my grandfather to South Africa. There began a business supplying beautiful silk to these countries and making a fortune and building a palace. 47, partition, everything's gone. On a ship, land in East Africa, begin life again. 20 years later, deported. But even the business there was, again, beautiful business. It was just wonderful to have a lifestyle because of that business with 15 of us, cars and domestics, and you name it, we had it. It was wonderful. Then you arrive in London, Shepherd's Bush, 15 of us, 4 bedrooms above a corner shop. It's a business. It's going to keep us fed if we work hard enough. And we did. And in 2 years, brothers, cousins, everybody, we had 6 shops. And again, another beautiful business. I look back and think at that time, oh gosh, 15 of us, 4 bedrooms. Imagine 8 teenagers getting ready for school. It was just, in one sense, awful. And yet I look back and see how it helped us survive and grow. So that's the sort of rough background.
I just cut in for a moment. You say a beautiful business. In what way was the corner shop? In what way was that a beautiful business?
Oh, I'll tell you in what way. First, it fed us all, because as our basics were met even from that one shop, we couldn't eat the chocolates, no, we couldn't drink the Tizers and the drinks, but it earned just enough for us to feed ourselves, but also gave us ideas. The beauty was this: we would notice people coming in, they had a different accent. So we asked them the question, where are you from? And they said, from Ireland. I said, Ireland, can you write it for me? I said, you mean Ireland? I understand where you're from. What do you miss from home? Because we've come from a place where we miss a lot of stuff. We miss our curry powder and our this and a whole lot of stuff. What do you miss? And they gave us a list. We said, right, here's a business. If we can get that list for them, every Irishman in 5 or 10 miles will come to our shop. And they did, which is why we could then buy those one shop, the other shop, because the cash flow improved. The previous owners started at 7 and shut at 5. We opened at 4, and I can't say we never shut, but we shut at 7 or 8 in the evening, opened again at 9 because the bingo hall was now finishing, so we could sell to the bingo trade. It was just beautiful to see the way that kind of business could be harnessed and used, and a different set of eyes looking at it see beauty. The previous owners, and we bought 6 shops, every one of them was fed up. Every one of them just wanted to see the back of the business and get away. We couldn't wait to get our hands on the next shop and on the next shop, because we suddenly saw here is something which is amazing. And we saw when I use the word beauty, we saw the beauty of the way in which we could survive without handouts from the states, from the state, because that was a strict rule that father laid down. You have not paid in the system, you will not take anything. So the beauty was, here is something that can actually work legitimately and in a way that really helped us through what could have been a very tough time. So I see the beauty in that respect, the beauty of the ability to survive and to thrive even, because from 4 bedrooms we now have back to our old style of everyone has their own bedroom, and it went on from there. So yeah, that's how I see, at least
meeting customer needs. Beauty. Yeah. So sorry, I'd cut in to continue the story.
Well, I mean, I learned a lot about business, hands-on. I mean, I'd seen father do it, seen brothers do it. We always discussed business at breakfast, lunch, and dinner back in Kenya. And again, here I saw it. How do you handle cash flow? How do you improve your working capital? So I'll give a simple example. When we came with very little. But the beauty of what we came with was a network of global relationships. You know, the relationships that grandfather had set up. Our name was known in the community. So when we needed working capital to buy the second shop, we generated cash from the cigarettes and all the newspapers and the extra hours we worked, not enough for a second shop. So I phoned up a relative in Hong Kong who knew the family, who we'd been dealing with from Kenya, said, look, we need this amount of money. This is what we're going to be doing. The trust was there. The relationship was there. He called someone in Manchester, his son. We phoned Manchester. Somebody went up to Manchester, collected the draft, came to London, and we had the working capital, network of relationships. And the banks wouldn't lend to us. But so what if that's a barrier? Again, I look at the beauty of relationships and networks, and I just think that's an aspect of business which I just love. Developing and building relationships that can then help one another, mutual benefit. So to me, that has been a very exciting part of my own journey, because from the corner shop, I ended up eventually, after marriage, working for my wife's uncle in a business that now was employing 7,000 people in 15 countries, turning over $200 million in the 80s. But for me, the principles from that corner shop or from that big business were very, very simple and similar. Working capital, banking, finance, turnover, and in this case, of course, looking after 7,000 employees was amazing. But when you're in a corner shop and you learn to deal with the lonely woman who comes in, a senior citizen woman who comes in and has no one else to talk to, you now have to spend time. And we never rushed them out. We knew we were the only ones they spoke with. The loneliness just hit us. You're dealing with people in extreme situations. When you have 7,000 people, you try and infuse that care for people right down to the shop floor. And that again helped the business grow, because people saw that we were a people business, that we looked after people, that we saw the beauty in the different people who worked for us without judging them or saying, and there were some who were suffering and struggling, especially, I can tell you, relatives. You had to employ relatives. And that was always tough, because not all of them were right up to scratch. So again, you've got to learn to deal with people, whatever the situation. And that has been a terrific learning. So yeah, there's a range of stuff you can see in terms of beauty in the business that you're learning, that you're running.
Brilliant. So bring us up to date then. What have you been involved in more recently in terms of businesses?
Well, previously there was, by the way, I noticed we've got some Scots people on the screen, and I can tell you when I ran the seafood
Welcome, Margaret.
it was wonderful that we had 600 amazing Scots women working for us in seafoods factories right across Scotland. And I always test the geography of Scotland when I meet a Scots person. Where is Inverbervie? Very few people know it. So if in the conversation you can tell me where it is, then be bravo to you. But Inverbervie, 200 people, smoked salmon, crabs, scampi, just fantastic. But so what am I doing now? I've shifted from all that because I saw the other side of business. If I'm honest with you, there is the beauty of business, but there is the ugly side as well. We have to be frank and honest. And here I can tell you one of the businesses I was in charge of, terrific, made loads of money. I saw the other side of the coin. Foreign exchange is being siphoned off a country that desperately needs it in Africa. Is that fair? Is that right? It was legitimate business, but that whole issue of fair trade really struck me. And so I agreed to become chairman of Tradecraft. That was, by the way, an open competition. So it's not that I said I want to be chairman. I had to apply, interviews, rigorous grilling. I got the job and I chaired it for 9 years. And I loved it because it really taught me the challenge of fair trade, surviving. That business is still struggling. I think 2 years ago when I was on this call, I shared during lockdown how we were nearly bankrupted. And it really was very, very tough. And I think I shared in jest, but also seriously, what saved us was toilet paper. If some may remember it, because that was a time when there was a run on toilet paper. And guess what? We had a warehouse full of it. So there you have again the beauty of business and the products you do. But that was Tradecraft. Today, there's another social impact business that I chair, organic cotton, because cotton accounts for 20% of the world's pollution. Again, I'm driven not by going into business just for the sake of profit. Is it going to help people? Here, you've got cotton farmers whose average lifespans are lower than norm. You have cotton farmers who suffer with illnesses because they're using the wrong insecticide and the wrong fertilizer. The big companies want to pump stuff into them. We say to them, no, we're going to train you. Use this, use that, do this, do that. And we then get what is called organic cotton. It costs more, but that whole fair trade experience has really helped me because I know that the big brands want it. Today, our biggest customer is Primark. Now, Primark is the one that was responsible for that awful fire in Bangladesh when 2,000 women died in Rana Plaza. They have turned a leaf and they are doing an amazing work in terms of sustainable cotton, fairness. So that sort of thing drives me, justice and compassion. And the margins will be tough, but business need not just be about margin. I really think sometimes that becomes such a driver that we lose sight of the reality and the people who get affected. And I think to me, a beautiful business is one that can balance those tensions, that equation. And it's one I have struggled with. I still struggle. Tradecraft is still struggling. Cotton Connect is doing very well because the market, young people want organic, young people want sustainable stuff. So that is helping us. But it's still finding, H&M and Burberry's and where can we source for Burberry, the long Burberry coats. Now we sourced the long stem cotton from Peru. There are solutions to where you can get fairly traded, sustainable product to really help companies, but it's who's willing to do it and who's going to battle to do it. We just scratched the surface so far.
It's lovely. I mean, that beauty business in the environmental side, but also what you said about not focusing on margins. And actually a good example local to me in Cheshire, Mitchell Motors, who is amazing with his staff. I mean, he has such retention because he knows all of them and their families. He focuses on that. And yet, actually, I believe he has one of the highest margins in that sector, the motor sector, which is good. But yes, Transcend is struggling because, we don't use 0-hour contracts and that means we struggle to compete. So it's a difficult balance. Just tell me one story. Well, there was a story you mentioned about the Scotland business, the fish business, which kind of seems to illustrate it. Because I think at one point you were, you could have closed it down because you'd run out of herring, was it?
Fish. No, it was prawns and fish. No, it's generally fish. What used to happen every year is for 3 months, the factories would shut down. because they said there's no fish. And I remember my granny talking about fish in Hyderabad, Pakistan. And I'm thinking, hang on, there's other parts of the world where you can get fish from. Why are these fish industries here in Scotland not looking beyond themselves? So I decided to go to India on a 10-day trip. And yeah, there they had prawns, and they had deep water prawns and a whole load of fish, which we said, right, can we now export that into Scotland? And for the 3 months when all those 600 women were laid off, effectively asked to stop working for 3 months, they now had a job for those extra 3 months. Look at their income, look at their how they were being blessed. We have the same asset now being used 12 months instead of 9 months. Anyone, it's a no-brainer. It's got to work and make things cheaper. So it was just fantastic to see, by extending where we went, how we could get stuff that could really help the business be even more beautiful.
Lovely. Yeah, it's kind of win-win-win. I love that story, and I can imagine there's women in Scotland. So we to get on to the kind of the main theme of this series, we've been talking about impact businesses. We're both involved in impact businesses. How do you see how purpose and impact relate to beauty in business? Are they connected, and how?
Oh, totally connected. We need to be clear of what the purpose of the business is, and that very often we can lose sight of. If one has acquired a business, I know when I acquired a business, I wanted that business because I needed the extra prawns or the extra scampi or whatever. But if I miss the overall purpose of why I'm doing what I'm doing, it'll become a crazy cycle and circle, which is never ending. Acquisition for the sake of acquisition, growth for the sake of growth. Nothing wrong with it, but what's the purpose? And what's the impact? And sometimes the more we do of something that is really not quite right, the worse things become. So we need to check what our purpose is, and then check what the impact is of what we are doing. I think that those are checks and balances. Those are measures that can help us ensure that the vision that was there, the mission that was there, doesn't get lost or corrupted by wrong motives and wrong purposes. So yes, to me, it's always good to find a way of keeping that in check and reviewing it and making sure that at all times we are not losing a track of what we were set up to do. And of course, as a follower of Christ, I can tell you now that for me, I'm always checking from the spiritual side. Is this something that is within the sort of spirit of what the Bible says? Sometimes there's a letter of the law and the spirit of the law. Just because I can do it doesn't make it right. So like, for example, when we had transfer pricing with a country in Africa, it was legal. But when I saw the impact of what is happening on the ground, I said, those dollars are needed there. Why am I transferring using transfer pricing in such a grossly unfair manner to take the dollars into Geneva or London and not do the good it can do there? So it's about balancing it. Even with the organic cotton business, we set up a limit of 2% return. It's a social impact business. Now we made 5%, 6%. It doesn't line anyone's pockets. It's all going back in the business. And we're being challenged to think, what can we do in India, in China, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, wherever we operate, and see that we are blessed. And even the company I work for, the family business, they really made a fortune. But what thrilled me was when the chairman, uncle, set up a foundation that today gives scholarships to anyone from India and from Nigeria to study in the best universities in the world deliberately. So they go back as leaders, having got that input. But all that has come from the business. To me, that's a beautiful gesture. I just love the fact that he did it. So it's that kind of purpose and impact, which really I think is terrific. And Tradecraft is part of that.
And I love the way you connect it with the Bible, and that's the focus. And people really sit up and think, if actually you're not focused primarily on money, and you think of examples like the Entertainer and Mitchell Motors that don't open on the Sunday, and have found actually sales have not been adversely affected.
Chick-fil-A is an example in the States, for example. Chick-fil-A, amazing successful business, and they're so generous. Hobby Lobby is another one in the States. And there are many examples here, as you rightly said, our very own, the Entertainer, and more. It's just terrific to see that contribution they're making, but how they're being blessed in terms of a successful business that is called by the media at all times to comment. I think it's terrific to see Gary do that. It's just fantastic.
Absolutely. I did the Paul Bulkley's Business as Ministry course about a year ago, which is really good to plug what he does. And it kind of, one of the things that came out of it, one of the challenges really, is how can we love God and love our neighbour in a business context? And that, you know, Peter's been talking about the connection between love and beauty in business. So, you know, there's a challenge. How do you see that? How do you love God and love our neighbour in business? And is that staff and customers, but what about competitors? How does it affect that kind of thing?
Well, not only competitors, literally neighbours. I'll tell you one example. In our corner shop, where I learned a real lesson, we had what is called the top shelf. Okay, this is before I became a follower of Jesus, before my brother became a follower of Jesus. By the way, more than 50 members of my family today follow Jesus. But before we became followers of Jesus, the top shelf was our biggest money earner. You know what I mean by the top shelf? Books that kids can't see because they're right up there. And our first and foremost customers were the local police force, who wanted first grab at the whole books that were coming in fresh, and then others joining in. The elders of the church come in and say, that's not right. But even before the elders, our neighbor who had 3 little children, a Greek Cypriot, came in and he said, please, friends, we are neighbors. My children come to your shop every day. What they're seeing at the top is not right. Please, can you stop it? I said, but it makes so much money for us. That shelf makes enough, as much as all the other shelves. It really is a high earner. But he pleaded with us. But when we became followers and so for a year we had this battle, and then we became followers of Jesus, and then the elders come and talk to us, and now they show us in the Bible what is right and what is wrong, and that is blatantly wrong. And so we were convicted. We didn't just return the books to get cash back, we burnt them.
Wow.
We burnt them. But while that was all happening, we were struggling. How are we going to make this difference up? And who is going to step in to make that difference up? And again, this is a different set of eyes looking at the same set of information and coming to a different conclusion now. We saw students going to the local college, but they were going to the local shops buying sandwiches and snacks, which is sandwiches. We said, look, we've got a workforce back there, granny, mum, aunt, sisters. Let's start selling sandwiches. So we buy fresh bread, Mother's Pride or whatever the brand was, butter, sandwiches. And this is before the days when all the regulations for food started coming in. So that, in those days, I'm talking the 1970s and 80s, even 70s. We sold these sandwiches, and you know, the students flocked in, the local office people flocked in, and in the end, we ended up making a greater margin and even more money than we did from the top shelf on its own. Brilliant. So, you know, it's like that the Bible verse that said, he who honors me, I will honor, says the Lord. And honestly, that to me is one of the most powerful examples I have personally of how that really worked here. And again, it was the same set of eyes now looking at the information out there and saying, what does it mean and how can we handle this differently? So it's opportunity spotted, strength identified. We've got the workforce, talent identified. What does it take to butter some bread and put some cheese and ham and whatever? And in fact, we had an advantage. We had the added curry powder that people love. They would come back for more of that, what they call gunpowder. I want that sandwich with that gunpowder, please. Yes. And they loved it. And this is in the 60s and 70s. It was fantastic. So there you are. So to me, that's a neighbor, being kind to a neighbor. But of course, circumstances drove us there, and believing in the Lord and changing our mindset on that whole area of pornography and understanding and being convicted it's wrong. So that was in that case. But otherwise, competitive businesses, you know, we were at the other end of a competing business when we tried to get stockfish. Okay, stockfish is a particular product which comes from Iceland and Norway. It's cod, and for example, which is hung to dry during, it's very cold up there. So it is hung to dry in the winter. And then when it dries, it's 99% protein. And there is a huge market in West Africa, and especially from the desert areas where they need protein. And there we were trying to get into that business, very lucrative, very profitable, but controlled by 5 big players in Nigeria, 5 big players. How do we break in? So we had to learn to live with competitors. What did we do? We were very naughty. For every £1,000,000 they shipped, we shipped £100,000, but we dumped our price so that we lost 10, they lost 100. Eventually they gave up and they came to us. Now, this is not loving a neighbor, terrible example, but we had to find a way to come in. But the end is really good because they respected us. They said, we were not letting you come in. Mm-hmm. You were trying to come into a business which we weren't allowing you to come in. We had to learn the lesson. Now, so I learned that lesson. Where there is competition, we are never in a position, I always take the business I'm in, never to be in a position to kill the competition and to destroy it, because that doesn't work for anyone. So, for example, I know in tradecraft, when somebody came in with a competing coffee, we loved it. Or take in publishing. I'll never forget when I published one of my early books. It was about explaining Hinduism to a community. I found that on the same time, there was an author at All Nations who was publishing a book on Hinduism. The publisher and myself chatted. We said, actually, this is brilliant. This is now going to create a market. Isn't it great? It's not going to be competitive. That book is going to raise interest. People will want more. We are there to provide them more. Let's encourage it and let's bless it and let's be positive about that. So there are ways to look at competition in terms of cooperation, I suppose would be the right word, and not being afraid. And if you have a product that is so good and so strong, keep going with it. But I think it's about respecting the other and making sure that we're not out there to destroy, to kill, but to work together as much as we can. Of course, there are limits. I'm a realist. There are limits still. At least let's have that as an aim.
We're getting towards the end of time. So, I will say on competition, when we set up Transcend, we decided that we would welcome competitors because we're starting a new sector in the Palestinian economy that was sustainable, which is slightly ironic because that is an issue for us now. But hey ho, I'll pass over that. Just we're getting towards the end of time. 2 quite quick fire questions. So quick answer to this. What's your secret? How would you summarize the key to business life?
Well, for me personally, it's prayer. I honestly believe for me, that is something I draw from. That is something I rest on, something that gives me a foundation. So for me, I was asked this by the BBC a few weeks ago on Sunday Morning Live, and she threw this question right at the end. And I said, for me, it's simple, prayer. Me and my wife, daily prayer, just committing things to the Lord and trusting Him. And that is an open secret.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, and that's a really good reminder. And then finally, you've published this book, My Silk Road.
Yes.
Is it going to tell us about it, and is it going to be a bestseller?
Well, the publisher thinks so. I wrote it for my grandchildren, if I'm honest, and I didn't expect to publish it. The publisher, concerned as a friend, he found out through the grapevine, approached me and said, I want to publish it. I said, are you sure? Will there be a market for this? He said, I have every confidence and I will publish it. And he produced the most beautiful hardback book in India and in London, and now wants to do it in the States. 1,000 copies in each place. And honestly, it really is beginning to take. And it's just launched last Friday formally, but already it's been hitting the market. And it's a series of stories beginning with the partition of India and how our family then went to Kenya, and how from Kenya to London, and from London, the many, many different journeys I've had in the public sector, fighting to get a seat on public boards, fighting discrimination, all that, but in a way that I believe has been a pleasant way to do it. As I come back again to yesterday's news, I just found it so sad and disappointing because I just loved your opening question. Where are you from? Well, this book actually answers it very robustly and very wholesomely, saying there is so much to share of where my journey has been. And it's my Silk Road because we started in the silk trade. But my message in the book is every single person can have their own Silk Road. There is no barrier that is insurmountable. And it is important to know what is your Silk Road and take that journey.
Thank you, Ram. That's really, really helpful and inspiring. Really appreciate talking with you. I see there are some questions in the chat, and Stephen's put the link to buy your book in. I haven't read it yet, but I will get onto it. So thank you. I'm going to hand back to Stephen.